But we are only a couple of weeks shy of 100 years since the leadership of an ailing Ottoman Empire, which was mainly hijacked by three high-ranked military officials, pashas, in a futile effort to prevent the collapse of the empire during the World War, decided to first arrest and murder more than 200 Armenian intellectuals in Istanbul, and not long after that began a brutal campaign of deportation of its Armenian community in the Syrian desert. People were either massacred on the way by Turkish security forces or outsourced Kurdish tribesmen, or let die from privation in camps. And there's virtually nothing controversial about the atrocities committed against Armenians or the sufferings they had been through. And in just a couple of years' time, a population of more than 2 million Armenians in the empire was reduced to barely 1/10 of this number. And following the collapse of the empire, the young Republic of Turkey was founded on collective silence and forgetting of this nightmare until 1970s and 80s, a time which marked the beginnings of open denial of the characterization of these events as genocide. Meanwhile, an Armenian identity in the modern day Armenia, as well as among the members of the diaspora all over the world, was being built in an atmosphere where, in a prominent journalist's words, the desire for revenge was not easy to separate from the desire of justice. A fierce war of politics among the politicians, a fierce war of historical interpretations among historians of the two communities began as Armenian militants began to carry out attacks against Turkish diplomats in foreign countries in the name of justice. Much has happened since then, and 2015 offers a great venue to reflect back what has been achieved and what has been lost in the political and academic battle between the two communities. There has been and there will be many scholarly efforts as well as political and diplomatic initiatives through which each side of the battle will try to position themselves the best possible way while trying to agree on a version of the truth that best suits their position. Our task is different tonight. It is not our intention to contribute to these efforts, though they are very, very important, but rather to touch upon another dimension, an emerging need rather, that sometimes gets muted in the heat of discussion and in the heat of contention. And this hasn't happened because of a policy change, an abrupt policy change, or a diplomatic maneuver, or a historical revelation like finding a smoking gun or something, but due to the fact that a significant portion of the Turkish society is now willing to revisit some of the dark pages of its past, including the oppression of non-Turkish populations of the late Ottoman Empire, a total collapse of state-sponsored narrative of denial, especially following the sinister assassination of an Armenian journalist, Kaan Ağartan, in Turkey, brought an end to the refusal of the genocide for thousands of Turks as they began to hear not only about the horrific times that Armenians had to endure, but also in some cases learned that, for instance, their grandmothers or great aunts were actually Armenian girls who were forcibly converted to Islam to survive the genocide. So similar stories of revelation fill newspaper stands, bookstores, and TV programs every day in Turkey. People realize that they are personally a part of a story, a history, which they used to listen as if it wasn't their own. Denial deeply wounds, and the Turkish denial has wounded not only Armenians, but also and mostly Turks too. Being exposed to a state-sponsored historical narrative decades after decades, one generation after another, Turks were simply not able to, or were too afraid to, develop a language of acknowledgement, sorrow, and regret. It hurts. It becomes a real wound, a constant trauma when one has the willingness to come to terms with the truth, but doesn't know how to do it. Similarly, I guess the Armenian community, which for decades took almost for granted that Turkish people were impossible to convince deniers, seem to have caught unprepared too. They have very little experience with an quote-unquote opponent who is ready and willing to accept, apologize, and mourn together for the loss of a shared civilization, the loss of humanity, the loss of a treasure which once belonged to both. Armenians may for the first time realize that Turks are wounded too, and their wound is now shared by Turks too. Then, that in itself is not an easy situation to handle. These mutual wounds do not heal automatically even if the both sides desire to do so. And nobody knows this better than our wonderful panelists today, who have dedicated their personal and professional lives to helping the two communities find that lost treasure, to heal that wound that they know exists on both sides. So without further ado, I want to turn the podium over to our presenters. would like to introduce them first. Our first panelist is Pam Steiner. Pam is a fellow at FXB Center for Health and Human Rights, located at the Harvard School of Public Health. She has long been part of facilitation teams conducting conflict resolution workshops for Armenians and Turks, and Israelis and Palestinians. She's currently writing a book on collective trauma based on her work. Tonight, Pam will address the collective trauma that influences the Armenian community and will provide insights into her work dealing with this issue. Our next speaker will be Harry Parsekian. Harry is a retired businessman and a current president of Friends of Ağartan Foundation, which was founded to promote the legacy of Ağartan. Harry is a human rights activist who works to promote peace, understanding, and justice amongst Turks and Armenians and all peoples of the world. And in his presentation tonight, Harry will talk about his personal experience with Turks and his observations and efforts, but maybe also disappointments and hopes for bringing these two communities together in a constructive dialogue. Following Harry, Gonca Sönmez-Poole will speak to us. Gonca is a longtime member of the Boston media community. She also has an MA degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, where she studied international human rights, minorities, and methods in mediation and conflict resolution. She is the founder of TAWA, Turkish-Armenian Women's Alliance, a grassroots alliance of Turkish and Armenian women. And Gonca's presentation will be a combination of her own personal reflections regarding the subject matter of our panel today, coupled with the summary of the journey of TAWA. Last but definitely not least, Paula Parnagian. Paula is the manager of diversity and inclusion for Eversource and president of Worldview Services, an international consulting firm specializing in diversity, conflict, and strategic change. She has been involved with numerous organizations and initiatives, including Citizens for Public Schools, Youth Police Dialogues, and the Angry Heart Initiative. Tonight, she will discuss what she has learned through her dialogue efforts through a broader lens and a set of experiences. She will speak not only about her involvement in the Armenian and Turkish efforts, but also about her work facilitating dialogues regarding other kinds of differences, including race and ethnicity. So each speaker is going to talk about 15 minutes. I will signal with my flashcards the last 5, 3, and 1 minutes, respectively. At the end of all presentation, we will receive questions from the audience and comments as well. And I would like to finally thank to our sponsors, Arts and Ideas Committee, Department of Sociology, Global Studies Program, and Committee on Diversity and Inclusion at Framingham State University. Thank you very much. Please stand.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Kaan, so much for this wonderful opportunity you're giving me to talk about something that I think is important, difficult, and very tender. And I also want to note that my co-panelists are all really dear friends with whom I've interacted about this work in very many ways over many years. So it's a joy to really thank them, because we've done lots of things together, been through a lot. 3 preliminary points. One, I'm going to speak of Armenians as a whole, while well aware that Armenians are not all alike. There are different subgroups of Armenians in the diaspora, in Armenia, and in Turkey. Even so, I aim to speak of a general phenomenon that applies to Armenians collectively. That doesn't mean that I think what I'm going to say is true in every single Armenian, generation to generation, over 100 years since the genocide. This transferred trauma takes place. My focus will be entirely on collective trauma, but this does not mean that I see collective trauma as the only explanation for the state of affairs. 3, my interest in collective trauma emerged from my work facilitating conflict resolution workshops with Armenians and Turks and with Israelis and Palestinians. Too often I have found that these parties come poorly prepared for constructive interaction. Similarly, some married couples go to couples therapy poorly prepared. Each person has issues of his or her own that interfere too much. So I'm looking for ways to make conflict resolution work more effective. One possibility is to prepare parties separately before bringing them together. My hypothesis is that Armenians, Turks, and Azeris might benefit from collective trauma recovery work before or at the same time as they meet together. I'm now going to offer a few words about trauma so we all have a common understanding. Trauma is an event or events. The traumatic state of mind is being in the actual experience of the event in real time. These are the very moments of being traumatized. The condition of traumatization is the condition of being stuck in the moments of being traumatized after the traumatizing event, and that can go on for your life. Here's the summary of my argument in abstract terms. I start by identifying the existence of Armenian traumatization that has been transmitted from generation to generation over the 100 years since the genocide. This transmitted trauma took and takes place when Armenians' raw emotional experience of the genocide is passed on. The fear, terror, anger, helplessness, grief. This transmission happens in different ways, sometimes through the narration of events, sometimes through silence, sometimes through hearing screams from nightmares, and so on. There are many ways. This phenomenon is not, of course, in any way uniquely Armenian. My argument will continue with demonstrating how the Armenian people as a collective, as a recipient of transmitted trauma, unconsciously created a psychological dependence on Turkey for its recovery from the trauma. That is a big negative consequence. Now, what do I mean by this dependence on Turkey? And what do I mean by saying that dependence impedes recovery from trauma? In a minute, I will show what I mean by the dependence. Right now, let's assume it exists. The dependence has turned Armenian energy away from itself toward Turkey, and in that way prevents Armenians collectively from speaking among themselves. Not having these conversations has in turn maintained the traumatization and thus contributed to a people who today are overly blinded by the past. Not completely, of course. In turn, that means that they are unable to take full advantage of the present as Armenians. That in sum is my argument, again, and there's nothing uniquely Armenian in these dynamics. In making this argument, my aim is to foster greater awareness of the existence and effects of transmitted traumatization. Awareness is a step to recovery. Recovery would have a big positive consequence. It would provide opportunities for greater choices about living for the Armenian people. Perhaps I should add that although I'm not Armenian, I've come to care quite a lot about the future well-being of Armenians collectively, as well as having an interest in the general need for finding ways for a people to recover in a good enough way only, and that's enough, from collective traumatization. Now let's very briefly note the difference between traumatization and PTSD. Many people mistakenly conflate the two. Psychological traumatization is a much broader category than PTSD. Many people who are traumatized do not have PTSD. They would not be diagnosed with PTSD. PTSD covers individuals who manifest fairly obviously many particular symptoms. The vast majority of individuals who go through terrible events do not have PTSD, but they do have trauma. They have been traumatized. They usually manifest many fewer symptoms and maybe not very obviously at all. There are also many individuals who've been traumatized in apparently undramatic ways. One of the less dramatic ways to be traumatized is to be the recipient of transmitted trauma. Often people think that traumatized individuals cannot function well. For many, this is true by most measures, but for many others, it is not. I have two friends who, as young children, survived final separation from their parents at age 7 during the Holocaust. Another friend survived the horrors of Auschwitz, and another the Nazi work camps. I mention Holocaust survivors because I personally don't know anybody who survived the Armenian Genocide. All 4 of the individuals I just mentioned have extremely accomplished, successful, and they are extremely accomplished and successful, and they have lived mostly extremely satisfying lives. One of them told me about the one trauma symptom he knows he has. Even now, in his late 80s, he has nightmares every single night, and he has had them ever since he was separated as a child from his parents, whom he never saw again. You would simply never guess that he had this experience from meeting him. Never. Now, a people, or peoples, this is the collective, manifest symptoms of traumatization when they avoid facing their own traumatization and focus all their attention on an outside source as responsible not only for the past, but also for the present and future. And they thereby impede the development and use of their higher capacities of mind needed to resolve difficult situations in the present. Even very accomplished, successful individuals traumatized by horrific collective events or the recipients of transmitted trauma of horrific collective events are not necessarily able to access the higher capacities of mind with regard to the issues and concerns that remind them of those events. Instead, they perceive their situation in limited ways, usually zero-sum terms. Thereby, they disable themselves from being likely to achieve sustainable and productive relations with each other, with the other, if that's something that's needed in the present. And instead, they substitute compelled repetition of their past traumatizing experiences for recovery from the collective trauma as victims again, or as perpetrators, or as both in different situations. Thus, thus, the effect of it ultimately is to restart the cycle, re-traumatizing themselves again through the continuation of violence. Now, I call that slide that you've just seen my reductio ad absurdum slide. So it's to make an argument and to make some points. I'm not claiming it has holistic truth to it. Okay, so before I can get to the heart of my talk, we need one other common understanding. It is about the relationship between collective psychology and individual psychology. Collective trauma is a subset of collective psychology. You and I all know that an individual is not a collectivity. We all know that individual psychology is not collective psychology. But we also know that individuals make up collectivities. The line between individual and collective psychology is very difficult to draw. An eminent political scientist, Lucian Pye, writes about the relationship between individual and collective psychology. Let's look at some of his thoughts. In the following slide, they are either direct quotes or my paraphrases. We have a great deal more solid knowledge about individual psychology than about group or collective behavior. That greater knowledge makes it tempting to jump from the individual to the collectivity. But is it valid to apply knowledge about individual psychology to the behavior of a family, a small work group, a political party, a nation? Is what is true for the individual also true for the national culture? Collective psychology, Pye states, is part of collective culture and includes collective political culture. Collective psychology, collective culture, collective political culture, they are all bigger than a single individual or group of individuals. All three overlap, interact, and evolve to make up the distinctive psyche of any people, and they create a people's national identity. So a collectivity has to have its distinctive psyche. Now here's the heart of my talk. Let's consider an aspect of traumatization in the collective Armenian psyche. I will exemplify it by using the words of 4 different people, 3 Armenians and 1 Turk. Let's listen first to the words of a woman who was clearly traumatized by the transmission of trauma via her parents and grandparents. When we talk about what happened, there are very few stories that emerge unequivocal. But there are 2 things I know to be true. 1, I know that if your grandmother told you that she watched as her mother was raped and beheaded, you would feel something was yours to defend. What is that thing? Is it your grandmother you are defending? Is it the facts of what happened to her that you are defending? Honor? Is it yourself you are defending? If the story of the brutality that your grandmother encountered were denied or diminished in any way, you would feel certain basic facts of your selfhood extinguished. If somebody says, no, what your grandmother suffered was not really quite as heinous as you're saying it is, they have said that your existence is not really so important. They have said nothing less than that you don't exist. This is a charge no human being can tolerate. 2, I know that if somebody tells you that you belong to a terrible group of people, you will reject every single word with all the force of your mind and spirit. What if somebody says to you that your history is ugly, that your history is not heroic, that your history does not have beauty in it? What you have been taught, that you don't know your history. Not only that, you don't know it. And what you have been taught by your mother and your father and your teachers, it's false. You will collapse inward to protect yourself. Because what has been said to you is nothing less than that your entire understanding of who you are is in danger, that your existence is without value. You wondered now and then about what the meaning of your life was, you will be left empty. The story you thought you were part of does not exist, and neither do you exist. Now, these words appear in the recently published book by Mylene Toumani, who is an Armenian American New York Times journalist. Collective traumatization, of course, does not occur only with genocide, but also, for example, with ethnic cleansing. Turks were ethnically cleansed when the Baltic nations threw them out 2 years before World War I. Thus, most of Toumani's thoughts could have been articulated by members of any people traumatized by another people, such as Armenians by Azeris or Azeris by Armenians. Back to Toumani's words. The deeds and statements she writes about are ugly, destructive, entirely egregious, and reprehensible. My focus is not on those responsible for them. My interest in what amounts to Toumani's admission of her own disempowerment. I ask you to notice that she tells us that she is defining herself consciously, in part, but mostly unconsciously by how others define her. She gives the perpetrator nation that power. You who wondered now and then about what the meaning of your life was will be left empty. The story you thought you were part of does not exist, neither do you exist. Now here is the second voice, that of a Turkish journalist. A few years ago, Ece Temel Kuran traveled to interview Armenians in order to be able to offer new information about them and about the common history to the Turkish public. While in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, she writes in her book Deep Mountain of her visit to the Genocide Museum. She comments on what she is thinking as she is being shown around by the museum's director. The museum awaits not Armenians but Turks, as though all of the objects in this museum have been specifically selected and displayed to express and explain something to the Turks who might visit. No matter where my eyes land, I'm aware that the assistant director is constantly studying my face, searching for something, signs of regret, or guilt, or a tear perhaps. Temel Kuran is noting just what Toumani has confessed, orientation to the Turks' reaction. Here's the third voice, one of today's outstanding Armenian intellectuals, Mark Nishanian, a descendant of some who died in the genocide. He has certainly been a recipient of transmitted trauma. Today, he is able to be an observer of the state of Armenian traumatization, although he doesn't call it that. He writes, I feel shame. I have always felt shame. I said, as far back as I can remember, I have grown up with shame. I have felt shame every time we spoke of ourselves. For each time we spoke of ourselves, we did not speak to ourselves. Each time an appeal was made to the third party, to the West, to the observer, to civilized humanity. As survivors, we have never ceased to appeal to the external gaze. Nishanian is describing the shame he feels at the lack of empowerment which Armenians manifest in relation to the observer, to civilized humanity, to the external gaze. Well, what's wrong with appealing to the external gaze? Why does it induce shame in Nishanian? Nishanian feels shame for himself and his people. He realizes that Armenians are speaking most deeply about themselves, not to themselves, but to others. Similarly, the Turkish journalist experienced the museum in Yerevan as directing its exhibits to appeal to people such as herself. It sounds as if this Museum of the Genocide is designed less as a memorial to the victims and more as an appeal to the perpetrator nation. The words I've just quoted from Tumani, Telmukuran, and Nishanian all speak to a basic reality, that there is a built-in human need for recognition of the truth of what happened. That is a built-in human need. What we've been seeing, though, is that those who have been victimized are asking that that need for recognition be fulfilled by the perpetrator nation. That is why denial has been called the last stage of genocide, and it does hurt, as you said in your introduction. But there is more to it. If Armenians depend on Turkey for their self-definition as a people of value, as Malin Tumani has said, they are in a very deep way helpless and disempowered, and they are thus re-traumatized. Armenians dependent on recognition from the perpetrator nation for their recovery is a replay of the original helplessness that the actual perpetrators imposed upon the victims in 1915. Now let's listen to a fourth voice, a leading Armenian and a leading Armenian historian, Richard Hovhannissian. Armenians feel deeply that they cannot fully overcome that blow until it is acknowledged through acts of contrition and redemption. Hence, in some ways, they are imprisoned by the past, and their liberation is dependent on actions of the perpetrator's side. Hovhannissian calls imprisonment what I have been speaking about as disempowerment. I would add that this imprisonment is unconsciously, not consciously, not deliberately self-imposed. Acknowledgement of the truth is a basic human need. Armenians deserve from Turkey acknowledgement and more. At least apology, reassurance that the crime will not be repeated, and reparations. But the very grim reality is that most victims rarely get acknowledgement of the truth from perpetrators, collectively or individually. Fortunately, to enable recovery of the descendants of the victimized, the need for acknowledgement does not have to be met by the perpetrator. The title to my talk is, What Might Recovery from Traumatization Accomplish for Armenians? I do not have answers, but I do know that recovery would enable Armenians to hammer out the best possible answers. They would stop seeing themselves primarily as victimized today by official Turkey. Instead, they would recognize and embrace themselves as empowered and liberated individuals and as an empowered and liberated collectivity, not for revenge-taking, but for seeing the present in its full possibilities, in particular with Armenians' troubled relations with its three powerful neighbors. The question is, do Armenians really want to recover? It's giving up some very major ways of being. And I think there is genuine ambivalence.
Tough act to follow. Pat, I want to thank you very much for bringing these wonderful people here today. I feel honored to be speaking in front of all of them. And I would like to thank the person who made up this flyer. I think this is the best flyer I've ever seen.
Sitting right over there.
Wait.
Do you mind getting to the truth?
Please stand.
Please stand. Why do I say that? Here you have Mount Ararat, okay, which is in Turkey, but it's the symbol of the Armenian people, okay, it's in their emblems and so forth. Then you have, I believe this is Horvira, which is right next to the bottom of where Mount Ararat is, and this is in Armenia. And then you have a symbol of this woman with her 3 children. I mean, this really designates exactly, and then you have the dove, okay, which is bringing forth peace and so forth. So I think that this summarizes exactly what this whole topic is about. So, thank you very much. Okay. My name is Parsekian. I happen to be president of Friends of Karate. I am a human rights person. I had the good fortune of meeting Kaan one time. I think it was either one of my two Turkish friends that got me the appointment with him. And I felt very honored because Kaan was a human rights activist, and I felt very honored to be able to meet this man because I start off with the American Indians. Okay, this was their land, and everybody else came thereafter. Whether it was the blacks that came after, the Japanese, the Italians, the Irish, everybody came after. So I start off with the American Indian first, and if you see the way the American Indian is treated today, it's a terrible way of being treated. Armenians were in Turkey for 3,000 years. Turks came after the Armenians, okay? And so really, what happened to the Armenians is they were massacred from their ancestral homeland. My mother grew up in a village called Evkera, which is in central Turkey. It's now called Bahçeli. Turkey changed the name of many of the Armenian villages, so forth. There are 500 Armenian families there, and there are 100 Turkish families there. They get along well. They get along well. Evkera was a center of commerce and industry. They had lawyers there. They even had a dance studio in Evkera. Okay, a dance studio. So what happened was my mother was 16 years old when they were taken away, and it was very traumatic for them. I had the good fortune of walking on the same cobblestones that my mother walked on, because I visited there in 1985, and when I visited there, it was such that I got, in Turkish, or in Armenian they say kush oldum. If you know, I got goose pimples on myself because I said, my God, I'm walking on the same cobblestones my mother walked on. So that it was very traumatizing in a way. Good word, traumatized. But it was very rewarding because I remember my mother saying that they used to walk home from church and they didn't want the candle, a certain religious holiday, they didn't want the candle to go out, they had to get home with that candle and so forth. So for me to be able to walk, like I say, on the same cobblestones that my mother walked on, it was very touching for me. Elif Shafak, noted Turkish novelist, wrote, "Listen to the stories beneath your feet." And as I walked in those cobblestones, I just felt what my mother went through. By that I mean, they loved their village, okay? They loved their village. They had a wonderful life there and so forth. And she would say to me, I live in Watertown, by the way, and said, our homes were made out of stone, you know? So, well, the ones in Watertown, they're made out of wood, you know? Our houses were really houses. And I had gone to Turkey in 1985 to climb Mount Ağartan, and unfortunately the mountain was closed because Turks and Kurds were fighting, and so I had to go back in 1986. And in between, I visited my mother's girlfriend, and my mother's girlfriend told me, Harry, your mother lived on Demircilik Caddesi. So when I went back in 1986, I specifically went to look for Demircilik Caddesi. And as soon as I walked into the village, there was the sign, you know, and it said Demircilik Caddesi. I said, my God, my mother lived here. And there's what is known as the Çeşme, a water fountain. And I said, my mother gathered water from this water fountain. And you know, I got a drink from that water, and I felt empowered that, you know, wow, this is where my mother gathered water to take to her house and so forth. It meant a lot to me to be able to get water from the same fountain. But anyway, sad things happened, and the village was rounded up, and they left. And I could only visualize the crying that was going on, the hurt that was going on, because these were their ancestral lands that they were being driven from. Where they were going, they didn't even know where they were going to go. They were just told to go. My mother lost her two brothers, Stepan and Miran, and her mother, Bartui, in the death march there. So that, you know, it's something. She said, we didn't want to look in back as to what was happening. They just kept on going. And when I had the good fortune to finally climb Ararat, we were up in the mountains there, and I saw sheep. And there's an expression in Armenian that says, "Vochkari beskatzin." We went as sheep. When you see sheep, one is one in back of the other. Okay, they just follow the haunch of the sheep in front of them. It's very interesting. So I finally understood what my mother was saying when she said that we vochkari beskatzin. We went as sheep. So it was a rather telling situation. My mother went through 2 or 3 massacres. She also endured the massacre of Izmir. She went through Aleppo, walking down to Mersin. From Mersin, she was able to get a ship to go to Izmir because her mother's sister, how they knew these kind of things, I don't know. But anyway, she went to Izmir, and she was living there with her mother's sister, her aunt. And then the situation in Izmir, or Smyrna, occurred. And she said, everybody was running to the water, to the sea. And you dared not look behind because what was happening in back of them, they dared not look to see. Anyway, so eventually she ended up in Greece. And when she ended up in Greece, they fled. There were Japanese ships there. There were American ships, but there were Japanese ships and Italian ships and so forth. So they went over to Greece, and she lived there for a number of years. Papa came from the United States. Papa came to the United States in 1911, so that he needed a bride. So there was no such thing as courting in those days. You want to get married? All right, we'll get married. So I guess some of his friends had told him about my mother, and so he went over to Greece. They got married and came back to the United States in 1928. I look at this and I say to myself, wow, I feel, first of all, that I'm an American. Then after that, I happen to be an Armenian American. But more important to me is that I'm a human being. And I care for what the suffering is of all people, and that's why I say I start off with the American Indian first. Because once you elevate the American Indian, you automatically elevate everybody else. So that I think that to me, like I say, is an important factor. I've been to Turkey a number of times. I've traveled north, south, east, and west. I've been there over a dozen times now, and I feel that that's my home. I've been to Armenia many, many times as well. But I feel very comfortable in Turkey. I feel comfortable in Armenia, but I feel comfortable in Turkey also. Why? I also have many Turkish friends now. I feel honored to have many of them because they're academicians. They're friends of Hrant Dink. Many of them most of them have been educated in the United States, whether you're talking about a Baskin Oran, whether you're talking about a Murad Belge, whether you're talking about Hassan Jamal, who was Jamal Pasha's grandson. And Jamal Pasha was one of the 3 perpetrators of the Armenian Genocide. And Hassan just received an honor from Harvard University, from the Nieman Foundation, because of his bravery in writing about the various events that have occurred in Turkey. 1,300 Turkish journalists have lost their jobs. Many of them have been imprisoned for things they have written. The 1,300 people have lost their jobs. So what Erdogan does now is that instead of jailing them, if anybody writes anything contrary to what Erdogan writes, he has now become a dictator, he's become a sultan, and so forth. He goes to the owner of the newspaper, and they will have that person fired from their job. So journalists today self-impose themselves in censorship. So that's a nuance there. So that at one time Turkey had more journalists in prison than the Japanese, than the China. Thank you, Gonca. Than China and Russia did. Okay, that's how many. But now the things has gone down only because journalists and columnists and so forth self-censor themselves. So. Let's have a look at my notes here, huh? Already? Jesus, didn't even start yet. They did it. Okay. One of the things that Turks do, Turkey does, not Turks, Turkey does, is, well, in order to not recognize the genocide, what you do is you put doubt. And once you put doubt in the situation, that expands it, and you delay the whole situation. So, and some of the newspapers then come along with the word alleged. Everybody, knows that what has occurred is a genocide, and it becomes more and more obvious that it is a genocide. I was talking about myself being a human rights activist, and one of the things that I didn't care for that I would like to show you is President Erdogan saying, Prime Minister Erdogan complains of being called even uglier things, Armenian. Okay? They have also said lots of things about me. One of them came and said I was Georgian. Then another came up and said, I beg your pardon, called me uglier things, saying I was Armenian. Erdogan said during a live interview on August 5th that he was purebred Turk. I mean, come on, can you imagine the President of America saying something that, they call me this, that, and the other thing? Yeah, that was him. That's the President. Now, there's another guy, he's the mayor of Ankara. And there's this Armenian guy. This is all recent. This is from today's Zaman. This Ankara mayor files complaint against journalists for calling him Armenian. I mean, man, what planet are we living on? I mean, God bless America. We are so fortunate with the freedoms that we have. We just don't realize how fortunate we are. And this is a friend of mine, Kaan Ağartan. Where do I meet a lot of these people at Harvard when they come to speak at the Center for Middle East Studies at Harvard. And this guy, I told him he's got to run for president. Look what he says. He says, main opposition Republican Party Bursa Deputy Kaan Ağartan has said that the Justice and Development Party government has been polarized in the public via the media, warning that bad incidents such as massacres and genocides took place at the end of such polarization process in history. The language of hate is raised via the media through remarks from high-ranking officials of the government and opinion leaders close to the government. The atmosphere of hatred is being reinforced by them. He also said that everybody from the president to ordinary citizens has to act in a responsible way in order to prevent violence, both by the state against citizens or between citizens from taking place in the public. He said the president, the prime minister, and even the ministers and deputies are not taking this warning into consideration. President of a nation. And there's a lot of hate things in the public school books. So one of the things that we're trying to get going is that to get rid of some of that hate type of things, that Armenians are traitors and so forth and so on. Let me talk about Kaan Ağartan, I'm sorry. I don't think one of the things I've talked to the Turkish ambassador. He's a nice guy. He was the Turkish ambassador. He's retired now. He's back in Istanbul. He's in Istanbul. About Tuzla camp. Tuzla camp was a camp where Kaan Ağartan, as an orphan, went to with his two brothers. Okay, it was owned by the Armenian Protestant Church, and this is a place out in the woods. Summertime they go out there, and it was a wonderful setting. And they built the buildings. The kids, there's pictures and so forth of how the kids built the buildings there with the concrete and the buckets and so forth and so on. Kaan Ağartan went there as an orphan. Kaan Ağartan met his wife there. They got married there. His children were born there. The government of Turkey confiscated that land. They confiscated the building. And there's many properties in Turkey that have been confiscated by the government. They just said, this is what we're going to do. And they did it. They took over these properties. My concern now is that I would love to see the Turkish government give that one, if they want to do one little thing, let them give Tuzla camp back to the Armenian Protestant church. And whether they use it as a summer camp or whatever they want to do is something. So I've raised that concern with people in government there, okay? So that I think that that would be a small gesture on the part of Turkey to do some kind of understanding, some kind of reconciliation and so forth, to show a little bit of heart as to what happened to Hrant Dink and so forth. So I think that I'll leave it there, except to say that, do I have another minute? 1 minute left, yeah. So that I think that, Hrant Dink was Hrant Dink was an Armenian Turkish journalist who was assassinated in front of his office.
I was going to cover that.
That's all right, okay. Anyway, so Hrant Dink was just a beautiful person. He was the Martin Luther King of Turkey. 200,000 people marched in his funeral, okay? 200,000 people or more marched in his funeral. And the thing of it is, there's not even 200, there's only 60,000 Armenians around Turkey, they say. So that he was a Martin Luther King, he was a Mandela, he was a Gandhi. So Turkey was very fortunate to have a Hrant Dink. He was that kind of a person. So I think that in the future, what am I looking for? Oh yeah, it's here someplace. I would look to see that, one of the things that Hrant Dink said was, do not blame them, they do not know. If you're not taught it in school, if it's not in your school books, if you're not subjected to those kinds of things, how would you know? So Hrant said, don't blame them. But fortunately, now we have cell phones, we have computers, we have internet. So Turkish society is being exposed to this type of thing. And my hope for the future, like I said, is to return Tuzla camp. It was Hrant's heart and soul. Open the borders, let people know each other. I mean, man, when I was growing up, I hated Turks. If I ever saw a Turk, ooh, boy, watch out. But now, some of them are my best friends. There's some other guys out there that won't be my best friends. But I have so many good Turkish friends. And these are the Turks that saved Armenians. Many, many Turks saved Armenians at risk of their own lives. So these are the people that I want to espouse and you know, Osman Koker came to Boston. And I went to Boston, California. I went to there just to make sure that no hot-blooded Armenian did anything to this guy. This guy wrote a book. It's called 100 Years of Armenians in Ottoman Turkey. It's a collection of postcards. It is a fantastic book. It's worth $1 million. I mean, one picture is worth 1,000 words. And Osman has made this book, which is just super, super. And 1 minute, 30 seconds. Last one. I also went to California one other time because some people go to Las Vegas. I don't go to Las Vegas. I read that Muge Gocha, professor at University of Michigan, Elif Shafak, who was a novelist and who was at University of Arizona, and Taner Akjam were going to speak in UCLA. Richard Hovnisian had invited them there. And I said, wow, three Turks are going to speak in LA with all those hot-blooded Armenians. So I had to go there. Fortunately, I was in the same hotel that Elif were, and then I met Taner and I met Muge, you know. And that was perhaps, I would say, the beginning of my involvement with Turks, and I am enjoying it immensely. I work with the Hrant Dink Foundation there to promote Hrant Dink's legacy. I also work with the, one of the things we did is we had a lecture at Harvard about Hrant Dink, and we had Rashid Khalidi speak. There's going to be another event at MIT, and flyers are here someplace. You're all welcome, and we hope to continue on promoting the Hrant's legacy. Thank you.
It's going to take me a few minutes. I want to bring this here so I can please stand by. of all, thank you, Kaan. Thank you, Framingham State University, for having us here. Thank you to all the other panelists, and thank you, the audience, for coming here. I want to say Parev, there's some Armenians here. I want to say hello, welcome. Are there any Turkish people in here? Wonderful, thank you. Merhaba. I wish there were a few more. So I have a quote up here, which I think is very appropriate. For those of you who may not know, I think you all may know, Raphael Lemkin may be the reason why we're here. Whether we like it or not, he's the man, a Polish Jew, who coined the expression genocide after World War II. So I'm going to start and end my little presentation with a few personal reflections, because I think it'll give you a window into where my human conscience lies in this whole entire spectrum. The first time I was faced with the subject of the Armenian Genocide, you may or may not believe it, was back in 1982, May 4th, 1982. A man that I knew personally was assassinated. He happened to be the honorary consul to Massachusetts from Turkey. At that point, what I knew, or I thought I knew, were a few very simple things. The Armenian terrorists had killed our Armenians. 2, Armenians in the US must hate us, the Turkish people. And 3, genocide? Wait a minute, isn't that the Holocaust? Isn't that something that the Nazis did to the Jewish people? And what does that have to do, anything to do with Armenians or Turkey? This is just too disturbing, I better run away. Fast forward 25 years from then, I woke up one morning to NPR, and a man was assassinated, point blank, on the streets of Istanbul in front of his office building. That man was Hrant Dink. I did not know him. He was a Turkish citizen of Armenian descent, a journalist, a writer, an author, a thinker, editor of a newspaper. This is what I knew. Something was terribly wrong in Turkey. And I had too many questions. I needed answers, and one thing I knew, I needed to close the gap in my education. So what happened is that I went and I made myself watch almost every single documentary I could find my hands on about the Armenian Genocide. Documentaries that were probably in the past were just too disturbing for me to look at. I made myself go to almost any event I could go to around here that had to do with the Armenian Genocide. And most of all, I talked to a lot of Armenians in this area. Now, I call my re-education journey a little bit of a learning, but also getting pissed off, I'm sorry. But good old Gloria Steinem said this, and I do believe in that a lot. Because yes, the information and the knowledge that was never given to me by the country of my birth did empower me and made me feel a lot more liberated. But it sure did piss me off. And this is why. Why was there one single paragraph in the history books that I read when I was in high school in Istanbul? One single paragraph, and all it said was that, well, Armenians, you know, at the end of the Ottoman Empire, they were in cahoots with the enemy, and you know, that they were traitors, and that's it. That was it. Why is it that it almost felt like brainwashing in a way that I kind of stayed distant from Armenians, especially here in the United States, until, and you have to understand, when I started to talk and defend Armenians here, I was at the ripe age of 48, 49. I was not young. So as I talked to people, I noticed something extremely significant to me, and you have to understand that this may be true for a lot of Turkish people. I realized all these village names and towns that they were referring to were just names that I only knew. Let's say I knew Elazığ. Well, they called it Karpet. And you know, I knew like Van, and well, they called it Shushans, and they would say Sebastia. Well, that's Sivas to me. But they talked about it in this most amazingly warm, you know, connection to those lands. That's where they were from. I, as a Turkish person, was not taught this. That's an amazing fact for me to realize. The other thing I noticed is that I had to go back and reread the UN Convention on the punishment and the prevention of the crime of genocide. I say reread why, because I did attend the Fletcher School and I did study international human rights law. But I think until after Hrant Dink was assassinated, I had not read it really carefully. And I am here to tell you, I may not be a legal scholar, I know what it means in 2015, and I wish there were more Turkish people in here, and I know how it applies to 1915, to the Armenian Genocide. However, I do want to tell you one thing, because I'm not here to give you a legal lesson. One thing that's extremely significant to me is this one family tree. This is only one of many family trees of Armenian individuals. It was given to me by a family here from Massachusetts a couple of years ago. The red name, now, for some reason, the reds are not appearing. I don't know why. Up there are 32 red. In my computer, they look red. For some reason, they're not showing here. 32 names of just one family. You have to understand that this is one village called Isabe. At the time, around there, it had 209 people. It's a small village in the town of Palu, in the province of Diyarbakir. 32 names of people who perished during the genocide. Now, you don't have to be a math genius to understand what that means. I know there's a contention. Some Turkish people will say, well, oh, I don't know, it was 500,000 or 600,000. Or you can take the figure of 1.5 million. What that really means in terms of what we have lost. What we have lost. Those people could have become journalists, writers, doctors, nurses, writers, authors, carpenters, artists. That's that many people who could have enriched the lands and the lives of Anatolia had there not been an Armenian genocide. Now, a couple of years ago, so with my newfound knowledge, what am I going to do? I can't rewrite history. I can't go knock on the door of Prime Minister then, Tayyip Erdogan, and tell him what to do. I don't think he was going to listen to what I had to say. So I thought, well, I have some experience with nonprofits. I have experience with some organizational groups. So I went out and decided that I'd start a totally grassroots group of Turkish and Armenian women. And people ask me why women. Well, I'm here to tell you that the field is kind of male-saturated. There are a lot of gentlemen in it, and I decided that it was time that women would get together. So this is Turkish-Armenian Women's Alliance. We met from September 2012 until about May 2014. I have to tell you, I mean, I may have started, but the congratulations should really go to those in the beginning 13. It went down to 11 women. A few of them may be in the room. It goes to them for the dedication and commitment to keep coming and meeting in my living room and keep talking and discussing. In the beginning, I had a little bit of too high of an ambition that, you know, we would get together and we would collaborate and do a project together, but, you know, my rude awakening was that we had to really get to know each other a lot. We had to just introduce ourselves to each other before we went ahead and do anything else. And just like any other group, we had some challenges as far as even deciding how we were going to talk about the past. Some of the challenges, I call diversity too much of a good thing, and that may be my fault. I go for inclusiveness, and I like people to come from all walks of life. It was an incredibly educated group of women, but I don't think there was unity of a profession or a unity of interest, and at times unity of a motive for being in a group like this, which can affect the outcome of what happens. There were intra-group splits, and I mean intra, within the groups. I don't think we were, as far as the Turkish and the Armenian women, all on the same page on certain matters, and it affects what happens in groups. And I don't like to use cliches, but I do have to in this case. The G word, the genocide, the word, the subject, the understanding was an important fact. Now, for that, I want to show you a video. It's only 3.5 minutes long. Some of the women in the group, not all, only 2 out of the Turkish participants actually sat down for this. I held some one-on-one interviews on camera with the women that said yes to this. And we covered a lot of other subjects, but this one is about the word genocide. It's about 3.5 minutes long.
Well, this seems to me to be about the past equals genocide. And I think that's why, in some way, we're all here, Turks and Armenians, because there is a divide because of that word. So, it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all.
I'm not saying create an amnesia and forget it, but accept it. I mean, sure, the government is in denial, but as people, we can accept and move forward, but then we have to go beyond our own circle, find ways of how can we do it.
I don't know for myself how much more, what I want. Do I need to hear from the Turkish women that acknowledgement of the genocide outright and say yes, it happened, so that I can then move forward, or if we can just sit around the table. I don't know what I myself am looking for,
and I'm really curious about people's reactions on that, because I really don't know what an Armenian thinks when they say the genocide word. What is the translation in Armenian? And obviously there are the universal, let's say the UN description, but then we have our own biases towards the word. I just wanted to explore more about those specific subsets of the whole discussion, especially I think I have a good understanding of the English and Turkish parts, but I'm curious about the Armenian translation and subtext of that specific word.
I know I got into a conversation long ago, like when I was in college, where somebody I was talking to said that the genocide didn't happen. And I don't know who would have said that other than a Turkish person. Maybe somebody else would have, but I mean, I'm guessing it might have been someone who was Turkish. And I remember being in this very fraught situation with that person. It's happening to me right now as I'm recalling it. Something happened the minute he said, as a man, the minute he said that, I felt my palms tingling, and I looked down and my palms had broken out in beads of sweat, a thing that has never happened to me before or since. Being in the presence of someone who denied that the genocide had happened, and I was just staggered that I had this incredibly, physiological response to it. And every time my palms are tingling right now just to remember this. Whenever I sort of recall the event, that's what happens to me. Beads of sweat on my, and I don't sweat much. It was really strange.
That was about late March, early April 2013. Soon after these interviews were conducted, and as we were approaching April 24th, 2013, we actually had an Armenian participant leave the group. She was absolutely uneasy and uncomfortable to be coming back and meeting with that group. To me, what that taught me, a lesson, as far as how these groups may or may not work, can be summarized as such. Do Turkish people have the right to test the patience of Armenians who simply prefer not to sit through any kind of internal processing, as an internal processing that Turkish people may be going through? Everybody can think to themselves. You can ask me later. The answer to that is no to me. Now, did we not have anything positive coming out of Tawa? I think so. Now, that's not a typo. I put a small s because I have high standards. So we had some successes. We lost members, but we kept meeting. Yes, we did. There were connections made. There was heightened awareness about the subject, I believe. And just the fact that it existed, I certainly had not heard of a group of this type of a group around here. And just one little aside before I close, I want to share with you is that after the official meetings were over, I had some of the women in the group come over. These were mothers with younger children. There were 4 little girls, and they were like running around my house and going to the basement up and down and everywhere. They happened to be, their mothers were Armenian. So everybody leaves, and a couple of days later, I go into my basement, and there are these 2 little sticky notes in the basement, and it read, Zepur, Zulal, Isabel, and Elise were here. And I just love it because they were there, so was Tawa, and that makes me hopeful for the future because I didn't have children of that age. My children are grown. But I have a sneaking suspicion that sooner rather than later, those Armenian girls are going to get together with some Turkish girls, or I don't know, Turkish girls or other girls. They're all going to get together, and by the time they reach my age, I'm not going to be around. The contention over the genocide issue is going to be over, and it's not going to be discussed. However, that's a positive side of Gonca. The negative side of Gonca is very disturbed by news from Turkey, and I'm only going to maybe mention one because there are several. As we speak now, there are people with nationalist racist tendencies that are going around Istanbul and putting anti-Armenian racist remarks on the walls of Armenian churches, however many churches were left there after the genocide. But this is happening. So we have a long road ahead of us. The last thing I want to tell you, we always talk about Martin Luther King, the great Martin Luther King, and we always remember that he has a wonderful quote about the arc of the moral universe being long, but it bends toward justice, right? We all know this. However, a couple of weeks ago, I was reading something about the Holocaust, and Martin Luther King also said this. He said, in this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. So what I want to tell you is this. I'm honestly embarrassed that it took me 48 years to learn and to look into the subject of the Armenian Genocide, and it took me another 2 years maybe to speak out about it. And I certainly hope that the rest of the world, the rest of humanity, and especially that the government of Turkey does not keep waiting. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
How are you?
Fine.
So I have to confess, I had a hard time getting ready for this evening because I've been doing dialogue sessions for over 25 years now, and there are many lessons that I've learned throughout those years. And my fervent belief is that dialogues work, that conversations work, that this is all a process. And as we do them, we bump into each other, we get hurt, we retract, we move forward, but we keep going. So one of the things that Pam and I have talked about many times is this notion of whether Armenians are survivors or victims. And I like to think that we're both. And I think the fact that that we're here tonight in this forum talking about this issue shows that we are in fact survivors, that 100 years later, here we are. And we're in this forum, organized by a Turkish professor, yes? And a panel of Turks and Armenians and Jewish folks. And that I don't know if this would have happened 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. I met Harry and Gonca and Pam. When did the Haan Foundation start?
2009?
Thank you, Gonca.
2009, so 6 years ago. I went to I went to a talk that an Armenian women's group put on, and I heard Raquel Dink, who is Haan Dink, you know the gentleman whose feet you saw there. His wife spoke about her work in the center and that she wanted to do dialogues, cross-cultural dialogues. And I was so moved by what she said, I went up to her and through a translator who was Harry, I said, I've been doing dialogue work for almost 20 years now and I'd like to help you. And she thanked me. And later Harry pulled me aside and said, if you want to do dialogue work, you have to meet your Turkish counterpart, Gonca. So the very next day, I met Gonca, and then Gonca introduced me to Pam. And then we started talking about efforts of things that we could do together. And Pam and I put Gonca and I put a proposal together to do Turkish-Armenian dialogues with dance and music and cultural events. And we presented it to Harry and some other folks, and they said, not yet, it's too early. It's too early, we're not there yet for that kind of forum. And we said, okay, we'll wait. And then Pam and I put a proposal together, and we brought it to an Armenian leadership group, Armenian Women's Leadership, and we said we want to do some dialogue with Armenian women leaders and talk about conflict and how we as Armenians, and given our history, that trauma, that history that we carry, how it gets in our way sometimes. And sometimes it gets in our way on a daily basis because we have these patterns, these stories in our head, and we have to do things to heal ourselves and to get to the other side of that. And again, we were told, not yet. It's a good idea, but not yet. And then I met Kaan 3 years ago here on the college doing diversity dialogues here. And Kaan said, oh, you know, I'm Turkish and I'm very interested in the Armenian-Turkish situation. And I said, well, welcome. There are a number of us working on this. And he said, I'd like to do something. I said, well, let's all do it together. And 3 years later, here we are. So my point is, if you're at this long enough, you see this, you see the patterns. You see how folks have ideas that work and don't work, how some things come together, other things fall apart. Gonca, were you talking about me? Was I that Armenian woman who dropped out? Yes, I was. You surprised me. You didn't mention you were going to mention that. But I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. Because when Gonca...
It's a lesson.
It was a lesson. And when Gonca put that group together, she asked me to join her in it. And I said, I can do that, but I have to tell you, I have great reservations on it. I would really like us to have an... May I share this? Yes, okay. You didn't warn me, so, all right, here we go. I said, I'd really like us to have an outside facilitator, somebody who can keep the space and help us to deal with any emotions that come up and keep the room safe and reframe things and help us to have balanced stories and sides. And she liked that idea, but felt that it really was not an acceptable solution for most of the members. It was not something that most of the members wanted. Yes?
I have a question for you.
Yes.
First thing first. What Armenian Americans they have to do in this country to force Obama to sign and recognize the genocide before anything else?
All right, so can you let me just finish this and then I'll get right to that? Okay. And I have an interesting answer for you, sir. Whether you agree or not is another story. Okay. So I joined Gonca in her effort and the other women, and I think I went to about 4 or 5 meetings, and I couldn't sleep after each meeting. I just couldn't sleep because of what had churned up inside of me, and I felt that I could not be 100% myself in that group and say the things I needed to say in that group because it did not feel that we had the kind of space for that a normal dialogue process would have. So with great regret, I dropped out of the group. Felt it was a great learning for me because typically as the dialogue facilitator, I'm the neutral facilitator. I'm the person who's standing outside the group, not taking sides, and allowing a conversation to happen. So here we are, a year or 2 later, and we're back together again. And one of the things that's been most powerful for me has been my relationship with Gonca. And the reason I wanted to have that relationship with Gonca, other than the fact that Harry said you better do it because it's a good idea, is because I understand from my work these last 2+ decades is that relationships and authentic friendships are things that will move us forward. When nothing else will do, those relationships and those connections will move us forward. So one of the things, back to your question, sir, is what will it take for Obama to acknowledge the genocide?
Correct.
I believe he will not, and that he will soon be replaced with the next president, whoever that president is going to be. And I believe the next president will not either until we have a critical mass politically who is telling the government it is time to do that.
I think people are not doing enough to tell Obama to do that because he's a political authority. And that Armenians in this country, they should listen.
Yes. So what is your name, sir? Gudajan?
Yeah.
Yes.
If I say
No.
something?
Let me just say.
To take the questions at the end.
Yes, that's what I want to say. So, Mr. Gudajan, if you could just wait for the question period, we're almost there.
Okay.
We're about 5 minutes away from it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your patience. Okay. So as you can see, this is a very emotional topic. It's got a lot of history. I'll ask folks to raise their hands if they are of Armenian descent and have a history that's tied to the genocide. There's a lot of history in this room. And for the folks who haven't raised their hands, perhaps they have a history that's tied to incredible trauma as well. And so in a dialogue process, question is, what do we learn from dialogues? Is that victims of trauma and of history that needs to be told need to tell their history, and they need to have folks acknowledge it and recognize it and to say, yes, that is true, that did happen. And so for those of us who are Armenians, we've been waiting 100 years for the world, for the US, for Turkey, for countries to acknowledge that. Slowly it's happening. How many countries, Harry? How many countries so far have been? 23. So slowly we're moving. And about 15 years ago, I was on a plane, and I was sitting on the aisle, and there was a gentleman sitting right across from me, and he's on the phone. He's speaking Armenian. And I'm in Europe somewhere. And I know enough Armenian to know he's speaking Armenian to his son. And I sort of understand what he's talking about, but not completely, because my Armenian's rusty. And after he gets off the phone, I say, "Inch besses." He looks at me and he says, "Did you overhear that whole conversation?" And I said, "Well, the good news is my Armenian's rusty, so I understood very little of it, but I understood you were Armenian talking to your son." And it turned out we became friends, and it turned out that his son was part of the group in Europe to be pushing for official recognition in France and also in Switzerland. He was part of that group. And I believe in my lifetime, we will get recognition from the US, and we will get recognition from Turkey. And the way we're going to do it is one step at a time, one conversation at a time, one dialogue at a time, and one friendship and relationship at a time. So I thank all of you in the room who have honored me with your friendship. I see many folks here from my past, from when I was 13 to when I was 40. And now when I'm 60. So I plan on being around till I'm at least 90, and it's going to happen, and you can say you heard it here first.
Now we have some time, about half an hour, I guess, for questions, maybe a little more. We're going to take in 3-4 questions at a time. Do you mind just introducing yourself, to whom that you are addressing your question, unless you're addressing to the whole panel, and try to keep the questions short so that so many people can ask questions. Or if you want to make comments, you may want to keep them concise to the point as well. So please, this.
My name is Stefan Poligan. I'm speaking as a second generation American-born Armenian. My grandparents were survivors and came to this country not of their own volition in 1920. First of all, I applaud what you're doing. I think that for two people, Turks and Armenians, whose names are coinciding in many articles, we know remarkably little about each other. Most Armenians, if you said, how many Turks do you know? Because we have a lot of opinions about Turks. We know very few. And I think the reverse is probably true. So dialogue is good, it's productive, it builds a grassroots process. I will tell you though, as a person who's active in the Armenian community, as the generations pass and we become more distant from the survivors, like my daughter who's here tonight, never knew her great-grandparents. So the trauma are not the images, unless you read books and look at pictures. It's not from family members, especially with the younger generation now, who are completely removed from what happened in 1915, and it's only something that needs to be passed on or educated on. My trauma in my generation and below that, I've worked with a lot of young people, is this isn't about hating Turks. It's not about anger. Our faith as a Christian people teaches us not to hate. Any Armenian who hates anybody is not practicing their faith. So to me, it's about justice. And I'm a little wary of this process, I'll be honest with you, because it always seems like we leave justice in the back door, later. This was a crime that was committed. So my trauma is that this is an unpunished crime. It's like someone being raped, and we not only don't acknowledge what happened, but the perpetrator is still walking around out there, free to continue that. And based on what Turkey is doing today, it looks like from a values perspective, they're really Ottomans, not the Republic of Turkey. And Turkey, in my opinion, is moving toward a civil war with its current state. That's not our direct concern, although we may be the beneficiaries of that someday. But we must acknowledge that this is about justice. It's not about hating or loving or friendships or relationships. Frankly, I don't care if Turkey ever apologizes, because the kind of apologies I expect are the kind Erdogan gave last year, where he got accolades from the world for reaching out to the Armenian people. It was a disingenuous slap in the face when he said, you know, I feel bad for the people that died. I don't know who did it, and maybe they just all committed suicide maybe, but I'm happy. So this isn't about anger, this isn't about, what our anxiety is about is that this crime should not go unpunished. Where would the Jews be today if there wasn't an Israel in 1948, and if Germany didn't fully acknowledge the crime, and that the world, as a result, extends, rightfully so, their eternal sympathies to the Jewish people? They don't have to stand in a room and listen to even the wording of the memo that you put out today, the contention about, there's no contention. It was, we will not acknowledge during the time of the Centennial any doubt from anybody that says whether or not this was a genocide or not. We owe that to our families and to our children in the future.
Good question for our panel? Yes, please.
My name is Roger Hagopian, and first thing I want to say is that my father was a survivor of the genocide. My grandparents, my grandfather's parents were killed in front of his eyes, and he ended up with his brother literally running out of the house. And my great uncle was saved by a Turkish family at the risk of that family's life. His name was, the husband's name was Mohammed, and the wife's name was Dura. And that's how I want to introduce what I have to say. But I do want to mention just one other thing that, you know, Pam Steiner discussed about empowering ourselves as Armenians and not letting the genocide and the cloud, the dark cloud of the genocide that hangs over our heads, stay with us and bring us down generation after generation. Well, I believe that it does carry through the generations. You know, I believe that in a way, I am a survivor of the genocide. You know, I feel like that. Many Armenians feel this way. And yet at the same time, we're able to move forward too. So I think you can do both. You can, you know, you can have to deal with this, but not be completely disempowered, if that's a word. You can still move forward and still realize that you need some form of recognition. And it doesn't have to be the Turkish government. I personally think, I'd like to see I'm an American first, like Harry. I'm an American first. And I feel like I want to see this country recognize it. But we have to recognize what we did to the Native Americans and slavery. That's it.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to just tie into what Roger said to the gentleman in the back about, because you asked, I think, Paula, about what can we do so Obama, accepts. Like Paula, I don't think Obama is going to say genocide, unfortunately. The next one may not. But you know when? I have this sneaking suspicion. When Turkey recognizes genocide, there will no longer be this geopolitical mumbo-jumbo balancing act, because U.S. has to be nice to Turkey because of several reasons, has to do with probably their military togetherness. That's when the United States may recognize. So unfortunately, I was just at a panel 2 nights ago when there was a lovely play being put on, with little spurts of reconciliation, maybe, whatever. And I think I confuse people, because when they ask me, as a Turkish person, what do you think about, what can this plays like this can do for, for dialogue or reconciliation, whatever you want to call it. And I confuse people, because I basically told them that I actually was a little conflicted, because unless there is real recognition for a genocide, coming from Turkey itself, from that country, from there, that's where Armenians were, deported and killed or whatever. That's where it is. Unless that is being discussed there, it's not going to help whether, Obama and the rest of them actually, because they will not. It's geopolitics, unfortunately. Unfortunately.
35 other countries, they are doing it right now. What's wrong with him?
U.S. you mean?
What's wrong with the U.S.?
Because they have interests. They have military bases. They have interests with Turkey. That's how the world works. I wish it didn't. I wish it didn't. That's how the world works.
Paula would like to say something, and then Pam will ask the question.
So I agree that the U.S. and Turkey will recognize it near each other. One will come before the other. I agree that the U.S. does not acknowledge it because of its relationship with the Turks. I also agree that it will shift when more and more Turks start demanding it. And social scientists know that in order to have that happen, you have to reach a critical mass of between 15 to 20% of a population group. And once you hit that number, so somewhere between 15 to 20%, there's a tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell talked about that tipping point. And at that point, as long as there isn't a major force to oppose it, then gradually, slowly but surely, the whole population, up to 90% or so, never 100%, will start to believe it, agree with it, and then start pushing for it. So right now, it's a secret, right?
It's like 6-7%. They made some surveys in Turkey.
Okay.
Yes, and the people, of course, surveys are surveys, because you have to take into, there may be people who are not saying what they really think, but still, 67% of people supposedly can actually recognize or say it or believe it.
6 to 7.
7%. Now, you may think that's terribly small because it's a country of 75 million people, but compared to 10 years ago, that's huge.
Right.
And I just want to add one other thing. Yes, there are some horrible racist things happening in Turkey. I have to also tell you there's an incredibly dedicated, committed group of human rights people who are working tirelessly in Turkey. And so I think whenever we open our mouth and say something, we have to make sure that we're not making their job harder, because they really are the ones that Harry goes and meets, and the ones that I know. So there are good things happening. I mean, they're going to have a huge, big commemoration in Istanbul called Project 2015 on April 24th. The town of Antep in the southeast, just like a week ago, had a commemoration for April 24th. These are unheard of in Turkey. In Diyarbakir, there's been commemorations in the past several years, and there's going to be one again this year. So you have, as Armenians, you have every right to be impatient. Look at me, I'm Turkish, I'm impatient, I'm pissed off, I told you. But, I mean, things that were like unimaginable 10 years ago are happening.
Pam has a question, and then Harry.
I'd like to ask you a question, if I may, and preface it, yes, because you didn't ask a question, so I thought I could ask you. Which is, you say you're interested in justice, and I'm for that. Let me ask you, what exactly you mean by that? And let me give you 7 choices and see if you could add to that. Because I'm very serious. I would really like to know what you would mean by it. Acknowledgement, apology, promise not to repeat from the Turkish government, rewriting the history textbooks to reflect reality, memorialize what happened, rather the way Germany has memorialized the Holocaust all over the country, restitution where possible, and reparations. So that's my list of 7, and I would really love to hear if I left things out, I well may have, and what exactly you would call receiving justice.
Well, I think that's a very fair question. I think that list is very complete, especially the last 2. Since the Turkish Republic was built on the blood money of 3 million Christians, and we know that institutionally that's how the Republic started. Financial reparations, absolutely. We all know what happened to the Republic of 1918 and land that was ceded to the Turkish government. So absolutely territorial concessions. But I think those other things are building blocks. Taking the hate out of the textbooks, dialogue, those are all paths toward the end. But I think the Armenian community has a challenge right now. The community has been so focused on recognition. Please tell me it was true. That, in my opinion, the recognition battle is over. The Armenians have won that battle. It may take another 10 years to play out, but Turkey knows they're going to lose the battle of recognition. And the United States, by the way, for those who don't know, has acknowledged the Armenian Genocide 4 times in its history. One by the executive branch, by President Reagan in 1981, 2 congressional resolutions, and in 1951 as a signature to the UN Convention on Genocide. That's a treaty that went through the entire treaty process, which means the Senate ratified it. And in there, the Armenian Genocide, as a signature, the Armenian Genocide is mentioned. So my question,
Turkey also is a signature.
and Turkey is a signature. My question to those who want American recognition is, how many times is enough? If Obama comes out and says, I recognize the genocide, but the next president doesn't, does that invalidate the previous president's comment? So what's the tangible value of it? Like you said, it's geopolitics, and it's what kind of leverage it's putting on Turkey that really counts. Whether they do that publicly or privately, I frankly don't care, as long as the pressure is applied.
Harry, you want to say something like this?
Yeah. Everybody's working there. I had heard that there was, when Hillary Clinton and the others were there was a good possibility something was going to happen. But what happened is that Erdogan ended up going to Azerbaijan. It was all set to open up the borders and so forth, but when Erdogan went to Azerbaijan and he came back, that was it. There was the borders weren't going to open. It was that close, okay, that this was going to happen. And I think that speaks a lot about what Erdogan wanted to do and the pressure of the United States government. So the United States government had a lot to do with that, I heard. On the other hand, Armenia and the Azeris have got tremendous amount of money that they're throwing around. It's just like just being thrown any place. You go any place you want to. And that has a big influence on Turkey. All right, so I think that the Azeri influence is very, very strong, and I think more could have been done if that pressure of the money, the gas that Turkey is able to get.
It won't end.
What's that?
It won't end because it's gas.
Because it's gas. So that I think that has a lot to play with it. And of course, Azerbaijan is going to get even more money because they're opening up another pipeline to circumvent the gas going to Europe from Russia. So they're going to get even more money. So you know, it's a problem, and I think Turkey wants to do something, but all that money coming from Azerbaijan being thrown in every direction is very difficult. And I know Petrosyan, when he was president, wanted to do something with Turkey. So you know, there's problems in every way, whether it's the nationalists in one country or the nationalists in the other country. But 10 years ago, Turks didn't even know about Armenians. Kaan Ağartan is the one who brought forth this whole thing about there was an Armenian around. He was the one who raised the conscience of Turks. He's the one who talked about the Turks, he talked about the Kurds, he talked about the Alevis and so forth. So Kaan Ağartan is the one who raised the conscience of the Turkish society. So in 10 years, we've come a long way. Those Turks, the funds of Goncas and mine and Pam's and Paula's and so forth, they're the ones who are the good Turks, those good Turks that save our parents and so forth. Today, these are the guys who are the good Turks. They're publishing and so forth. So and one of the important things is the internet, because they cannot block, you know, sorry,
Well,
Turkey does too. Yeah, Turkey does do that. They block the Twitter, YouTube, and various things like that. But, you know, the young people that I've met in Turkey, I am so impressed. Many of them have been educated in the United States, okay? Very, very intelligent, very intelligent. And I just, like I say, feel honored to know them. And they want the best for the government of Turkey. They want to see a democratic Turkey. And it's our job. When Hassan Jabal came and he spoke at Harvard, and after he finished speaking, a young Turkish student got up and he asked, Hassan Bey, I understand everything that you said. What can I do? So there is a thirst. There is a thirst. There is a desire to learn. And Turks will set themselves free once they learn their own history. Just as we in America didn't know about the Japanese, we didn't know about all the things that had occurred to the blacks, to the American Indians. Go, travel America, and see the places that they had placed the American Indians. They took them off the good lands and put them out in the boondocks. So anyway, work for human rights.
Before coming to Pam, I'd like to turn to the audience, especially to our students maybe.
Yeah, really.
If they would like to ask any questions. Yes, please, over there.
Hello, I'm a corporate communications major here, and I'm a junior at Framingham State. And my question isn't necessarily geared towards the Armenian Turkish. It's more about you guys as communicators. I think this presentation was incredibly very effective. And we are often in discussions with sometimes people feeling like there are two opposing sides. What would your advice be to communicators who want to communicate a message effectively, even if the other side might be sensitive to the material?
I'd like to thank you very much for the question. I'd like to take at least one more question before I turn to the panel for answer. Any other questions for our panelists, please? Over there, please.
Yeah, there's one thing that kind of tripped me up as far as the hatred towards Armenians occurring in Turkey right now. Is that something that should be seen as a continuation, or is it a resurgence? Are these talks leading to tensions, which they inevitably would and might, and you know, is that part of the growing pains of progress?
One more question maybe over there, please. Yes.
Hi, I'm Taylor Kelly. I'm a history major for FSU. My question goes that since this is the 100th anniversary and since so much time has passed, the concept of justice has somewhat faded away in the sense that since many of the participants of the genocide are long deceased, as well as many of their children, and for the Armenian community whose parents went through the horrible trauma of the genocide, that a certain sense of justice for people being able to face their perpetrators or to face the victims has been lost over time? Or
I dare to take one more actually from there. Yes, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Melanie. I'm originally from Switzerland, so I'm very well aware of, like, I wouldn't call it hostility, but yes, kind of hostility towards German and the Holocaust. I was wondering if, unfortunately, I can't see your last name.
Oh, my last name?
Yeah.
It's all right. Gonca. Just call me Gonca.
Okay. Your experience, like you said, when you educated yourself, you went up to Armenians and asked about it. What was their reaction that you actually hear about it?
It was wonderful. They wanted to hear that a Turkish person was asking them and was interested. I mean, they were like happy because usually the reaction up until the last several years when there's an opening, the reaction from Turkey or Turks is that if you were to even mention the word genocide, then that puts them in a defensive manner, because that's just like so against everything that they know. They were perfectly happy. I don't want to take over your thing, but I want to answer before I forget the young man in the back who asked about the racist issues. That's one thing I had to say it in this room because I wanted to really make a point about how Turkey has to recognize genocide. I don't want it to be alarmist in any way, because what is happening really, I mean, just think about, some Branch Davidians in US or some crazy Ku Klux Klan people in the South. I mean, there will be disgusting, repulsive people everywhere, but the reason why it's important now is that April 24th is approaching. It's the Centennial. And we all know, I mean, I know enough. I was in Turkey the whole month of February. There's a lot of defensive stuff happening on the part of the government. So if the government is pushing for, don't listen to anybody about genocide, or they've done even, I mean, I wrote about it if you want to know. There's other things that Turkey is doing, and I don't want to get into nitty gritty, like they will decide that they were going to commemorate a big War of Independence Day. Usually it's on like March 18th or April 18th, and they decided to do it on April 24th, and they invited the president of Armenia, which I just, I don't even understand the psychology or the reason. I just can't. It makes me pissed off, as I said. So anyway, when those things are happening, of course, it's also bringing out some crazy nationalist people to go around thinking, oh my God, this is against us, we better go and do something. So I would not make it into an alarmist, panicky thing, because those people are slowly going to be sidelined by the people who are true humanitarians in Turkey.
Oh yeah. And I'd like to clarify, I didn't take it as such. As
That's okay, I just have to say it.
Yeah.
Other responses from our panel to the question?
Which one?
Well, I can maybe start a response for the communication question. Oh, sorry. So was your question how to communicate on a sensitive topic?
Yes, how would you maybe start going off on a topic to someone who might not know? Like, say, I guess in this context, a Turkish person who does not know about the Armenian genocide, or found out who didn't know much about it.
Yeah.
And like, how would you approach such a topic?
Yeah, well, maybe I can share a very short story. About, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago, I was doing a diversity workshop in Chicago for some lawyers. And sometimes when I do my intros or along the way I'm giving examples, I talk a little bit about the fact that I'm a grandchild of genocide survivors, that 3 of my 4 grandparents survived the genocide. And, I didn't say much more than that. I just maybe explained that, our historic homeland was taken from us, and we were driven out of what is now Turkey. And that was sort of it. And then afterwards, she pulled me aside. This woman pulled me aside, and she was a Turkish woman. And she said, we don't like that word. That made me very uncomfortable, and I said, oh. And she said, you know, it's the word, the G word. We just don't, you know, we take offense to it, we don't like it, we don't agree with it, we haven't heard it, you know, we haven't heard that side of the story, et cetera, et cetera. So what I did was I asked her some questions about, well, what is it about it that you don't like? Well, it's not in our history books. Well, have you heard the notion? Yes, but you know, it casts a bad light on us. And then I had a conversation with her about how Americans have perpetrated genocide on the Native Americans, and how, you know, this goes on around the world where groups will try to eradicate other groups. It's just sort of, it's not singular to Turkey, it's something in the human condition. And so typically, if I hit a hot button with someone, and I can contain my own hot button, which can be hard sometimes, what I'll do is I'll listen a lot and then just slowly try to take it point by point. So what'll happen in a diversity dialogue, when people hit a point where they're at odds with each other, and it will happen, there'll be a flashpoint, and suddenly everybody's disagreeing and everybody's talking at once. What I'll do as the neutral facilitator, who's trying to, you know, maintain my own calm, is to slow it down and tell people everybody will get a chance to talk if they wish to talk, and all sides will be heard. So people start to relax, they understand that they will be heard, and if I don't get to say it, the person next to me will get to say it. And then we just start chipping away at it very slowly. I learned the hard way that you don't steamroll over conflict, hot buttons, a flashpoint. What you do is you just slow it down. And if you slow it down and you give it the time it needs, it will take care of itself. The people in the room will take care of it.
Other responses maybe before I take other questions?
I forgot the question.
This gentleman had a question about the history.
Yes.
So
I didn't quite get to the question.
Whether
It's been, you're reaching the 100th year anniversary.
Yes.
Most of pretty much the victims and the perpetrators, I mean, they're pretty much dead. Has that, like, do you think that has caused, like, the sense of justice is not as strong as before, in the sense that basically it's like, now I'm not saying in terms of basically the demand for justice, but the terms of receiving it is not as going to be as strong as in the past, because you don't have individuals or people who committed these crimes, who committed these atrocities, and that they will be punished for their actions committed. Like, there's a sense of loss in the fact that why couldn't we have punished these people for these actions?
What do you mean by punish?
Like, in terms of the fact you couldn't they didn't go to trial, they didn't get
There was a trial. There were trials. 1919, there was trials.
War crime trials, if I remember correctly.
Yes, right, that's right. And I don't know.
So they were assassinated, basically, later by.
Yeah, but it's like, so the sense that they were brought to court.
I mean, he's saying, you know what he means.
Yeah, it's a fair question.
It's a fair question. And I guess, I mean, are you asking, like, whether it affects what Turkey is doing? Like the fact that it's been so long?
Affects that since it's been so long, has it affect both Turks and Armenians in the sense that it's like something has been lost over time, in the fact that that basically these men did not get what was fully, like, what is carried out in terms of, like, in the Holocaust with Cambodia, with Rwanda, we have these people were brought forward, and there were
three main perpetrators were all...
Three main perpetrators.
They were all assassinated.
The main perpetrators, yes, but I'm talking about the guys that were down with the...
Probably
with basically,
you're right. There's probably something lost in terms of what can be achieved. The word genocide didn't come into existence till the 1940s.
Yeah.
And the ability to go backwards in time in the courts doesn't seem very good.
Yeah.
There seems to be possibility to get some reparations, I believe.
I'll go along with...
I understand what you're saying, and it's a good question about how, since all of the survivors pretty much have passed away, you know, they suffered for this, and are they going to really get anything if we get the land back and things like that.
Yeah, it's like-
But we haven't really mentioned it in this, but this year at the 100th anniversary, all of those who died for their Christian faith are going to be named into sainthood, all the Armenians. So all those people, I know that it's, right now they didn't get their land, but they're becoming saints, which this is the first time in 500 years or something, that the Armenian Church has put anyone in sainthood. So at least they're getting around.
If I could just add something, the Republic of Armenia, when it got established in 1992, that kind of rejuvenated, because now the Armenians have a legal voice at the United Nations, if you will, or in the world community.
Yeah.
We didn't have that for the first 70 years.
Yeah, it's like in all general terms, I'm an outsider of this, so it's like I'm not full.
Any other questions? Any other questions over there, please? Yes. Yes, you are.
I think that commerce trumps diversity. That's a big border there. Is there any commerce going through? Commerce, business, trade.
Oh, with Turkey and Armenia?
That it would behoove them to get together?
That's a big border. Is there any trade?
It's happening. It's happening. Yes, I mean the borders are officially closed, but there is movement and there are people doing business back and forth. I have to emphasize that the problem in Turkey, and even if you forget about the legality, because international, for example, the ICC, the big court that tries people that have done atrocities, it doesn't go before 2008, so that's gone. Nobody can be tried and everything. And then I think the Article 9 of the Genocide Convention leaves open like the compensation and restitution issue, according to what I just read. However, the problem in Turkey, it's a moral social justice issue. People have to understand, people can be doing business, but but the problem still remains. There is business being done, of course. People are getting together. I think a couple of years ago there was some cheese business happening between Armenia and Turkey. I mean, whatever, of course. And people are probably also doing commerce and getting some money, and they're probably just fine, and nobody is asking them about the G word. I have to tell you, I believe there are probably Armenians who do business, and maybe they're not asking because it's okay for them.
Well,
the problem is a moral issue. It's a moral issue.
So just from I'll say this quickly, Pam. Just from some of the reading I've done recently, some of the folks that are doing a lot of work in this field do feel that when economic interests are taken into account and encouraged, it does encourage sides to get together faster. So I think your point is very well taken.
I was glad you mentioned two other things I want to pick up on. Just a moment ago, you mentioned the Republic of Armenia, and that was the first time that anybody in the audience tonight mentioned the Republic of Armenia, which I think is interesting, that the intense attention is given to the past, which was part of what I was trying to point out. And you also said that if Armenia had received the recognition, or Armenians, of the genocide in the same way parallel to the recognition of the world of the Holocaust, Armenians would be much better off, and maybe Armenia would be, because it would be like Israel. But I'm not so sure that's true. Yes, Germany has given money to Israel, and that is a lump sum, and it's certainly important. But ultimately, it's the Jews all over the world, and particularly in America, who have supported Israel, for good and bad, in my opinion, big time. But I don't hear that same attention, generally, when I hear Armenians speak to each other in this country, which I wish I did. I would like to hear much more attention by Armenians to their country, which is in a perilous state and needs all the intelligent support and support of all kinds that it can get.
Maybe on that note, we have to close tonight. It was a wonderful evening. Thank you very much for coming.